everyone. This is the Audio Mullet. Yes, this is the podcast where we talk about things like a mullet that are unfashionable, but oh, so cool. You know you want to sport one. Man, woman, child, you ought to have a mullet. I am Michael J. Nelson. Of course, Doug TenNapel is here and Ethan Nicolle. And we could not be more thrilled to have our most distinguished guest ever. I mean, that's not even close. It's not even close.
Yeah, we had the Pope. We had the Pope on and George Bush on and Bono.
Nothing compared to this. A man who, he didn't know it until moments ago when we introduced ourselves, has been a huge influence on all of our lives and the lives of people around us who tell us to shut up about G.K. Chesterton, but we won't. And part of the reason is this man, Mr. Dale Ahlquist. Dale, thank you so much for being here.
A great pleasure to be with you, gentlemen.
Why don't you start by introducing yourself as you'd like to be introduced and what you do in regards G.K. Chesterton?
Well, I've spent almost 30 years being told to shut up about Chesterton. And when I say almost 30, I mean really almost 40. It's 38 years since I started reading Chesterton. And like so many other people, I started reading Chesterton on my honeymoon. And being a big C.S. Lewis fan, I picked up The Everlasting Man. That was the book that I started with because that was the book that had been so influential on C.S. Lewis. And when I discovered Chesterton, I said, I felt like my whole college education had been a fraud. And it turned out it was a fraud. But here's this great English writer, giant of English literature, great thinker who just put it all together, who in one book managed to combine history and literature and philosophy and mythology and theology and psychology and everything else, just packs it all into one book to explain that you can't explain history any other way than the Christian explanation. And I was blown away. In fact, Dorothy L. Sayers, another great English writer, said the first time she read Chesterton, it was like a strong wind coming into the building and blowing out all the windows. I had that same sensation. Mm-hmm. And I also knew that I probably understood about 1/10 of what I had just read.
Right.
But the sensation was, okay, I didn't understand this, but I can't get enough of it. I must read more. And back then in the early 80s, most of Chesterton's books were out of print, so I started combing through used bookstores to get my hands on as many Chesterton books as I could. And it became a passion. It took over my life. I did a master's thesis on Chesterton and eventually started the Chesterton Society, started running it full time, and haven't done anything useful since.
Wait, so you started the Chesterton Society?
Yes. Yeah. I started the American Chesterton Society in 1996.
How do people find the Chesterton Society, just for people who are interested and want to hook up with you? And
Chesterton.org. Chesterton.org. If they go to Chesterton.com, Doug, they will find hydraulic valves. But yeah, so Chesterton.org, and we the mission was, okay, a whole generation just got cheated out of the best writer in the English language in the last century. Let's try to correct that wrong, and we just try to expose people to Chesterton. Why is he so relevant? He seems to be talking about what's going on now, even though he wrote 100 years ago. When you pick up any essay by Chesterton, it's more up to date than a headline. It's more relevant, and he just gets to the nut of the issue quicker than any other writer. And he does it with charm and with joy, and with a certain kind of humble confidence that is just so appealing. It just draws you in. And
there's something about him that is so, it's obvious you're reading one of the most brilliant men who ever existed. almost naturally brilliant, and also that he is the most wonderful, jolly man, that it would be such a pleasure to be in his presence. And then also the Christian attribute of humility comes out of him. This is a humble man. And there's something so appealing about him. And I like what you said about you only understood like 10% of him, because it's weird because he's not snooty. It's not like when I read Nietzsche or something and I'm like confused and lost and disoriented. It's Chesterton is making you stand on your tiptoes as a fully human person. He's going to engage your mind, your heart, your sense of humor, your humanity. And we're not used to reading things with all of those tools. He is a man in full, and he makes you read him, and you become a man in full by exercising those muscles. I'd also like to remind our listeners that we're going to have down in the show notes a link to your introduction to him of who is G.K. Chesterton and why haven't I heard of him, I believe is what it's called. But we need to link to that, because just read that. That's Dale's very eloquent introduction. When I start G.K. Chesterton groups, I often read that essay because it just kind of bullet points, boom, 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 boom. The attributes and why you should read them, why you have to read them, and you're really missing out. That's what makes people so passionate about it.
Yes, and I think there was a thing that we said at the beginning of all of our Chesterton meetings, and still try to do it, especially if there's a new person. But why are we all gathered here reading this? And so why don't we dive into that? What would you say to the person who says, why in the world am I going to sit in a room when I could go bowling and read some fat guy from 100 years ago? Come on, is this for real? You're putting me on, right? This is a joke. I'm not going to do this. Why should this guy go?
Well, there is a certain appeal to bowling that I think shouldn't degrade. The great thing about Chesterton is there is a greater pleasure in thinking than there is in doing most other things. But thinking, of course, is hard work, says Chesterton. In fact, most people would rather have someone else do their thinking for them, because thinking is such hard work. But once you start doing it, it's got the biggest payoff. It's the biggest payback. Everything starts operating. Everything starts moving in your body and your mind and your soul. And Chesterton gets those gears turning, and it just leads to everything else. He starts putting it all together, and there's such a great pleasure, a sublime pleasure in seeing all of truth unfold in front of you.
So I was introduced to G.K. Chesterton by Scott Derrickson, the director of Exorcism of Emily Rose and Doctor Strange, probably well over 10 years ago, probably 12 years ago. And he had gone to Biola, and he had studied Derrida and Wittgenstein and all these guys that basically dismantled words. They're the postmoderns. And he got to where he was a gibbling wreck coming out of Biola, and he had like a crisis of faith, and he went to his theology professor and he just said, I have deconstructed, words. I can't even think straight now. And he said, can you help me? Like, I need to tie a knot in the bottom of my rope. And the professor threw orthodoxy in front of him and said, deconstruct this. and Derrickson read it, and that was the knot in the bottom of the rope for him and his way back out. What is it about Chesterton that so battles what the lies of modernity, of modern thinking, everything from postmodernism to materialism to existential? I mean, he's borderline existentialist, but I wouldn't formally put him in that category. But he dismantles so many lies that came out before and after him. What is it about him that does that? How does that work?
Well, he really is the answer to Nietzsche. He addresses all of Nietzsche's objections, and Nietzsche has these what he thinks are showstopper questions that no one can answer, and Chesterton answers them, and it puts the meaning back into the meaninglessness that has been inflicted on us by modern philosophy, and and he does it with complete ease. It's not even, he doesn't even break into a sweat when he does it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something so refreshing about that. It's his point from Man Who Was Thursday that sanity is actually much more interesting than insanity.
Mm-hmm.
And chaos is dull.
Yeah, drawing the line. He always defends drawing as I'm an artist, so the idea of drawing the line is interesting. And I also love his dismantling of the artistic temperament. It's like so many artists are like in their own head to be all, this is the least fruity guy in the world. And yet he was also a robust illustrator, a journalist. Like he wrote plays. Why is it that in modernity, George Bernard Shaw, who is Chesterton's best friend, why is it that George Bernard Shaw has been elevated to like near God status, and Chesterton has been buried, particularly by the university, buried by the people who are supposed to care about ideas the most?
It's interesting. Both Shaw and Chesterton used paradox as their modus operandi. That was the rhetorical device they used. The only difference is that Shaw's paradoxes were all false and meaningless, and Chesterton's are all true.
Mm-hmm.
And Chesterton says there's nothing so contemptible as a mere paradox. A typical Shavian paradox is the golden rule is that there is no rule.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't have any meaning to it. Whereas when Chesterton says something like the self is more distant than any star, that means something.
Yeah. Mind blowing. So it's true. Why are we fleeing from truth? So many of Chesterton's take the titles of like In Defense of Sanity. Tremendous Trifles is another title that we really recommend that book a lot. The book of essays, Tremendous Trifles.
I think the modern world has just been seduced, is what it is. And Nietzsche epitomizes that seduction. His words are seductive. They draw you in, and you're caught by them, even though there's no meaning there. But you're taken away by the beautiful language, and I think people have used it sort of like a drug, and a drug is just an empty pleasure, and I think that's what Shaw's ideas are all empty, but they give a fleeting pleasure, and that's the modern world. They go back to repeat the fleeting pleasure rather than anything lasting or permanent.
Why were so many of Chesterton's truisms lost on his closest friend, Shaw? Like the idea of defending like the greenness of trees and just the wonder of nature and beauty and things. And I'm going like, why did it fail on Shaw?
Well, Shaw was a guy with no humility whatsoever. He was just utterly full of himself. And so for him to ever admit that he was wrong, it was just unthinkable. The best he could do was try to find ways in which he thought that Chesterton was agreeing with him. And he only concede a point if he thought, well, yeah, you're agreeing with me, so therefore you must got it. You have it. But I think that's part of it. The great difference is you have humility and pride in those two figures, and it's strange that the modern world would go for the egotist instead of the humble.
Yeah, maybe not so strange that they would go for the egotist, of course. And all of his contemporaries who he mixed up with, he would debate. Well, he did whole debate circuits with Shaw, and it was jolly and humorous and wonderful. And they would talk for hours off the top of their head. And it's some of the most robust debate you'll ever. That's old school debate. But Chesterton also he would mix it up with H.G. Wells and Kipling, and he was friends with Barrie, the author of Peter Pan. He showed up in a Western movie.
Yeah, that's one of the great treasures we're trying to find. Lost treasures is that James Barrie, the director, the author of Peter Pan, made a Western starring George Bernard Shaw and G.K. Chesterton.
We gotta find it, man. We gotta find it.
There's just a still photograph that exists, but in one of the scenes, Shaw takes a motorcycle over a cliff and the other 3 cowboys try to rescue him. So they tie a rope around Chesterton, instead of a trunk of the tree to pull Shaw back up over the precipice. It just wouldn't that be great to see that?
Yeah, so he was a 300-pound man. He carried a sword cane. He would carry. Did he have a gun? Isn't there not all? He
carried a gun, and he also carried a big Texas knife with a 7-inch blade.
And is it true that he held a gun on a guy who was asking for a reason to live or something like that?
Well, he claims he did that. He said if someone says that life is not worth living, I pull out a gun and offer to shoot the person.
Oh, such a mullet.
Always with the most pleasing results, he said. So he may have done it more than once. Yeah.
No one's ever taken him up on it.
I just want to ask, so to someone out there who's listening, and like we said, a lot of our people probably have never read Chesterton, and we've had this argument before, and I think we usually end up in roughly the same place. Doug will say, by no means read The Man Who Was Thursday first. I might disagree with that. But where do you start? You're just, your interest is piqued. You want to dive in. I don't know if even doing it by yourself is something you dare attempt, but let's say they do. Where should they start with Chesterton? What do you read?
Well, I used to give a lot of talks on Chesterton and always was asked that question. And I noticed I was giving a different answer every time. Every time it was asked, because I always realized, well, this is a good book to read first, although it really helps to start with this book if you've already read this other one. And so I wrote a book. I wrote an introductory book to Chesterton, which is The Apostle of Common Sense. And then I wrote another introductory book, which is called Common Sense 101. And I usually direct people to those 2 books as a way to get them in the door. And then they could explore on their own.
They can get The Apostle of Common Sense on Amazon.
Oh, did you just use the word of that river in South America?
Yeah.
Doug? It sounded like you did.
Yeah.
It sounded like you said that. Yeah,
Dale, I want accessibility.
If you use Amazon, you're going to go to hell. Okay, so let's make that sure clear. You should buy the book from Chesterton.org. Or from a local bookstore. So those would be the places to buy the book.
That would be the most Chestertonian way to buy it.
First build a local bookstore yourself, because there won't be one near you.
First build one and then buy it from that store.
That's right.
But get it from Chesterton.org, The Apostle of Common Sense, or Common Sense 101, and don't buy from Amazon. Everybody get that? Don't buy from Amazon. If you take anything away from our little discussion this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, whenever you're listening to it, don't buy from Amazon. Try to make the world a better place.
Let's roll in an ad from our sponsor, Amazon.com.
Yes, thank you. Amazon.com, ladies and gentlemen. Click Amazon.com for all your needs.
Literally all of them.
Literally everything. Buy the earth, buy your neighbor's soul, and sell it. Sell it on eBay.
It's funny because it's one of the things Chesterton talked about is the loss of local commerce and the loss of local control. And we praise capitalism, and yet we put all our money in one place, and we might as well be the grand Soviet distribution center, right?
Yeah. We fought it way beforehand, way before.
Yeah. I think a lot of our listeners are on the creative side of things. And I think that's one thing that drew me to Chesterton was when I found out that, I don't know if he was actually an art student, but that he was an illustrator, an aspiring illustrator. I don't know if that was like his career goal at the first or not, but that he was coming from a creative place. I think that combined with the idea that a lot of Christian thinkers, like, you want to emulate their ideas and repeat the ideas to people, which with Chesterton, I want to do that. But more than that, he's such a creative, original thinker. He makes me want to be like that way. I want to be creative and original like him and express my belief in a completely unique way, the way he did.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just kind of in that vein, I'd like listeners to hear about that part of Chesterton, the creative side
Chesterton,
of him.
He went to a pretty reputable preparatory school called St. Paul's in London, and all of his friends went on to Oxford and Cambridge. But the headmaster told Chesterton's parents don't bother sending him to the university. It's hopeless to teach him anything. And, so he went to art school instead. He went to the Slade School of Art.
That's where all of us go. That's where all of us go who don't want to learn anything.
Yeah, and he dropped out of art school, and this was during the decadent 90s, 1890s, and he was just appalled by the decadence and the lethargy and really the darkness he found at art school. And but he thought he was going to become an artist, but he sort of stumbled into journalism instead, and he said it was the easiest of all professions. Yeah, easy for him to say, but but his first writing was actually art criticism. So he wrote about art at the beginning of his career. And I think what's interesting is, Chesterton points out that the artist, of course, the artist in all of us, because most people, he says, are naturally artists, and most of us are naturally poets. He said it's only the critics who aren't. And he says that's one of our most godlike qualities, is the fact that we are creators. God created us in his own image, so we create, and we have that godlike experience of creating when we paint a picture or write a story.
Or as Tolkien said, we're sub creators.
Yeah. Tolkien got that idea from Chesterton.
Yes, he did. The more I read Chesterton, the more I go, hey, wait, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien ripped all this off from Chesterton.
Totally.
They did well with those ideas.
Yeah. Well, they popularized them. Do you think so? C.S. Lewis, right, was enamored with Everlasting Man. This also backs up what you just said. In Everlasting Man, Chesterton goes back into the cave. I assume he's referencing Lascaux, but he says the earliest thing we know about men is that they're artists and they were religious. And he's tying it all the way back to it's just kind of what we've always done. That's kind of a sign of humanity. Do you think C.S. Lewis always wanted to be a poet? He was seduced by that myth and things, but when you read his apologetics, it was very, it was surgical and methodical. Do you think he was he could never quite be Chesterton, but he was enamored by him because Chesterton was embodying the poet apologist that he never could be because of his great mind, because of his surgical mind?
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. I had the great privilege of meeting Walter Hooper a few years ago in Oxford, and he told me that C.S. Lewis's greatest regret in his life was that he never met Chesterton face to face. That was what he was. He was such an admirer of him, and what's interesting, Doug, is that he had this plan of how he was going to meet Chesterton, but he was too shy to carry it out, and he also failed in two other ways. But the plan was this: that he was going to write a book of poems and have Chesterton write the introduction to it, because this is something Chesterton often did to help out young authors and young poets. As he'd write the introduction to their book, he wrote over 200 introductions to books. And that's how these guys got published, because if Chesterton's name was on the book, a publisher would publish it. One of Chesterton's great lines is that publishers do not deny they are publishers unless there are poets lurking about.
Yeah. I've got one of his book on Dickens that he wrote the introduction to. Yeah. So C.S. Lewis was going to write this book of poetry, and then he was going to ask Chesterton to write the introduction. And Walter Hooper said there were only two problems with his plan. One is he never wrote the book of poetry, and he never asked Chesterton to write the introduction. So otherwise, it was a perfect plan otherwise.
So I have this theory I want to run past you. You don't have to agree with it at all. But speaking of apologetics, I became a Christian in my 30s, and for years I tried to talk myself out of it. And so I would read, but I knew at bottom it was my only hope. And so I read just tons of apologetics. So I'm the greatest tyro of just sort of classic apologetics ever. And I just come out of it knowing not much more. But when I try to pass that on to younger minds, I feel like we're so stewed in the postmodernism now that it doesn't, there's not even a place to get a toehold with people. And I find that Chesterton just handing them a book of Chesterton is a much more robust apologetic. And I see when I'm doing it with young people and we get to one of those just absolute chestnuts of Chesterton, you see it in their eyes. You see them lift their heads up from the book and go, whoa, and you see the light go on. And that doesn't happen very often at all with classical apologetics to me. Is there something to my theory?
I think there is something to your theory, Mike, because we forget that apologetics is a defense of the faith. It's not an evangelical tool, as it were. It's what you use when the faith is attacked, and you don't evangelize with it. So Chesterton says when you're building any kind of scheme, you have to be like Nehemiah when he's rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. He says he had a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other hand, and the sword was to defend himself, and that's what the use of reason and wit is. If you're attacked, you have to be able to use that. But the creative tool, the trowel, is the act of love, and people are drawn to the creativity. That's what they're drawn to. The sword doesn't attract them, but the sword is there in case they attack. And so Chesterton, with his great wit, is able to fend off the attacks on the faith, and that's funny and appealing. But behind that wit is his joy, and that's what makes him so attractive. And that's what people are drawn to.
He loves the readers. We can feel that when you read him. Oh, this guy loves me. He never knew me. And that's where I think the gratitude, and I wish I could meet him thing comes from, is I know that I don't think he ever thought that his works would reach me because he was so humble.
Absolutely.
But he touches you,
And the great thing is you are meeting him. When you read him, you are meeting him. You're having the conversation with him.
Sure.
And you really feel like it's back and forth because he seems to be answering your thoughts as you are starting to ask the next question. He's ready with the answer. It is a dialogue when you read him.
Yeah. He's also 2 steps ahead of anybody else. Before I always think of it as the Chesterton backflip, at the end of each chapter where he's trying to lose you throughout the chapter and you're like, lost. I'm going, where is this going? And why did he start this chapter this way? And then at the end of the chapter, he'll give you some flying knife edge kick to the back of your head. And you're like, holy cow. And it blows your head open. And he keeps going back to that. He'll build themes throughout. It's why I always recommend orthodoxy first. Cause I just go, I've had the most curmudgeonly anti-Catholic, all my Reformed friends. And I'm very sympathetic to Reformation theology, but the most anti-Catholic reformer, they read it, and by the end of orthodoxy, they're like, holy cow, I'm convinced. He got me. He seduces.
Well, it shows why he's such a good mystery writer too, doesn't it, Doug? Because he, the mystery writer leads you along with these clues, and you keep going deeper and deeper, and he gives you just enough to make you keep going, and he just reveals it as you need to know it, and then boom, shocks you with the thing you didn't see coming at all.
Yeah. So I loved reading his essay on the suffragettes, because he comes up with arguments on why it's not why a woman shouldn't vote, but it is a bizarre side defense of paying the most profound compliment to women. The highest, I think he holds women in the highest regard, and really kind of pulls the pants down on the suffragette movement at the same time, going like, these people have it completely backwards. I can't imagine he got much sympathy for that position when he wrote it, but I also don't get the sense in his defense of truth that he ever cared.
Well, he loved taking on the suffragettes during his time. And what's so interesting, he was one of the few anti-suffragettes who he wasn't anti-suffragette, he was anti-suffragist. Okay, but he was one of the few who actually accepted their invitations to public debates, and people would go because they wanted to hear Chesterton speak and mix up. But it was always, of course, so good-natured. There was never anything vile or disrespectful. It was the suffragists couldn't help but like him, even though they were disagreeing with him. And he once even marched with them to make sure that they got a good hearing. And he once protected them when they were. He had them come stay at his house when they were being pelted with eggs by. So it's a great story. It is.
It's fantastic. It shows that's his love coming out too.
Yeah.
That he saw the Imago Dei in them, even though he disagreed with the probably more the tone of the movement. Probably shocked him the most.
His main argument about the vote is that it was disreputable. The vote was disreputable, so why include women in it? Right?
That's right.
We have to reform the political system, and make democracy mean something rather than bring women down into the dirt.
Politics and voting was a low thing that men went into, almost like how you send them to the front lines of war or send them off on a whaling ship for 6 months out of the year to do scum work. And he didn't think a woman should wade into that. That was an awful thing to have the true lord of the house go into.
His other argument, of course, is that the family is the basic unit of society, so the family should vote as a unit rather than having individual votes where the individual interests tend to undermine the family interests.
That's right.
Talk about that. With what is his relationship to his wife and his family? Because I know that's a huge part of who he was, and so give us a little sketch of that.
Yeah, Chesterton's wife Frances was an absolutely wonderful and devoted wife who made it possible for him to be the writer that he was, because he was so constantly taken up with getting the next thing written. He was always writing under a deadline, and we're talking about one of the most prolific writers who ever lived. So he's just always had an article due or a book due. And
real quick, over 11,000 essays, books, and plays. Which, as you say in your introduction, and imagine you guys all writing 11,000 essays that are truer 100 years from when you wrote them than when you actually put pen to paper.
And in the research I'm doing right now, I'm finding he was always being engaged as a speaker too. He was giving a public speech probably 4 or 5 nights a week. Almost every night he had to go out and give a talk somewhere. So it's astonishing how much time he had to spend in creative action. And so none of that would have been possible without Frances taking care of all the details in his life. And he was really helpless without her.
This is a man who'd get lost. He couldn't find his own home. Didn't know where he was.
Yeah,
I love that about him too. I can relate to that.
Once got into a cab and gave the cab driver the address, and it was across the street. So
that's so good.
What's the famous telegraph to? He ends up takes the wrong train or something and telegraphs.
He gets off the train and walks to a telegraph station and sends a telegram to his wife, because usually she was with him, but it's one of the times when she wasn't with him. And Emmett Market Harbor, where ought I to be?
Doesn't know where he is, doesn't know where he should be.
But he says absent-mindedness simply means present-mindedness about something else.
Talk about his writing style too, because there were people who looked up his original manuscripts and were furious that basically he dictated them off the top of his head, almost extemporaneously. They came out finished with very few rewrites.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's just no pain of rewriting and editing there. Sometimes he'd cross out a word and change it. Sometimes he would dictate an essay to his secretary, who would type it out as he dictated while he was writing another essay longhand.
God, I hate him. I hate him.
And then she'd hand him the typewritten manuscript, and he'd take a look at it, and then he would handwrite a new an additional closing paragraph to finish his thought there. So it came fully formed from him. Everything came fully formed, and we were talking, I think, earlier about his intuitive sense of the truth. One of the literary critics of Chesterton said, other people reason towards the truth. Chesterton seems to reason from the truth.
Yeah.
He's trying to bring the truth to you so that you can understand it. So he's trying to figure out, how do you think, and so how can we make you understand it? If you look at it that way, it sheds an enormous amount of light on his style of writing.
That baffles me. Okay, that's the part of him that baffles me. Is it's like he read everything before he read it, including
that's right. He didn't have a Chesterton to read.
Yeah, including his essay on Saint Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah,
where you said he had a stack of books to research. He just kind of flipped one open, closed it, and then wrote this essay just off the top of his head. And St. Thomas Aquinas scholars read this book and say, no one has captured in the history of writing on this guy has ever captured it like Chesterton.
Yeah, I think it's one of his great accomplishments is his book on Thomas Aquinas, and able to summarize the Summa Theologica in one chapter. Just an astonishing accomplishment. And yeah, the great Thomistic scholars have praised it as the best book ever written on St. Thomas Aquinas. And this guy's a journalist who wrote it.
So I would say that a modern person would look at his mind and go, well, okay, there's no explanation. He's an alien. I mean, it's bizarre that it's so far beyond our understanding and as we read him, we're trying to take him in, and he's like tossing it off with, writing left-handed, basically with two books with each hand. It's inexplicable.
Well, he's sort of like a Bach or a Mozart. You have to look at him that way. I think that really helps, that he's got a God-given gift, and he actually then used his gift for the glory of God. And that's what Bach and Mozart did. And so he just did it with words, whereas they did it with music. And,
I read about Mark O'Connor, the violinist who plays in any style of virtuoso, of bluegrass, anything. His mother said, I handed him a violin and he just started playing it. It's like, and that's the Chesterton. You get that feeling that he didn't have, there was not a lot of struggle. There was none of this Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours. He just came out and was Chesterton.
There was a time where we were all a bunch of Protestants, and he has the book Why I'm Catholic or something like that. And we're all going, okay, this is going to be great. We're going to get his apologetic for Catholicism. We read the whole book, and at the end we're like, I didn't get it. I didn't get it. Because I want like a straight answer, like an apologetics answer of like historical fact.
You're right. He doesn't. It's not a point by point analysis at all. That's not how he does it. He just surrounds you with the truth.
Yeah.
Well, we're closing in. I just want to be respectful of Mr. Ahlquist's time. We're closing in to the time where we tend to, in these podcasts of Mr. Ahlquist, we get a little crazy at the back end of it. No, we do. we talk about serious topics and then we get a little lighter. So we wanted to just devote this last, we got 15 minutes to crazy questions about Chesterton and just throw them at you if you're game for that.
Just rapid fire nerd questions.
All right, let's do this.
I want to know what Chesterton drank, because I have Chesterton meetings and I always just had, we have a little bourbon around or something, and someone told me once, no, that is incorrect. So set the record straight. What did he prefer?
He preferred red wine, and claret was what the English call it. It's a Bordeaux, and he preferred drinking it out of a pint glass.
Wow, he brought it home at the end there. At first, I was like, "Oh dear, this is not good," but then the pint glass sold it for me.
Yeah, I was hoping that would. He said, I have no objection to vodka except I once tasted it.
I just lost so much respect for him. I don't know what to do. This is like finding out he has a pentagram tattoo on him somewhere.
Well, I think he preferred the traditional fermented and vinted drinks rather than the spirits, because this was during Prohibition and the rise of the cocktail generation. his objection to that is that the cocktails were mostly for the purpose of getting drunk. That's what they were used for. And whereas he wanted drinking to be a convivial thing, and he never drank to get drunk. He said, never drink when you're sad, only drink when you're happy.
That's right. And wine sounds strangely Chestertonian in it having a full body and a greater a longer tradition of artistry to it, going all the way back.
Did he leave any unfinished projects behind that you've seen?
Yeah, he had been commissioned to write 3 books that he never completed. One was going to be on Shakespeare, one was going to be on Napoleon, and one was going to be on Savonarola, the Florentine reformer, and never completed any of those books. What I did is I put together all of his writings on Shakespeare that I could find, and tried to put out that book they never wrote, which is called The Soul of Wit, G.K. Chesterton on William Shakespeare.
Man, I wonder so much stuff about this guy. He's a complete mystery to me. What about his? We already know that he's probably a workaholic by how much stuff he put out. He's probably a foodaholic by the fact that he weighed over 300 pounds.
Okay, that's a good one. I should, while you're working out the rest of your question, I'll interrupt you, okay?
Sure.
Because maybe the question will become better than the one that you're forming now. A lot of people think that he ate a lot to account for his great weight, but you talk about the mystery. The people who knew him said he never ate a lot. His secretary said she was amazed by how little he ate. His closest lifelong friend, Edmund Hugh Bentley, who knew him since childhood, said he probably had some sort of a glandular condition.
Sure.
Because he also never saw him overindulge at table. So, so that he was not a foodaholic. And you say workaholic. He did say, "I never have enough nothing to do." He wished he could have relaxed more, but he was always writing under a deadline, always giving of himself to people. So that was, yeah.
Where I would wonder, where did his rebellious spirit come from? And I wouldn't say rebellious, but just he's such an iconoclast and such a unique guy. And we as social beings, there's always pressure for us to snap into culture. If you don't act a certain way according to your time, you'll get punished, you'll get unemployed, or you'll fall out of fashion, or you won't be great or whatever. What do you think his secret was because he comes out as the most unique man of any time. If he was alive today, he'd be a unique man. If he's alive back then 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, he would stand out as a wonderfully unique human being that we wish everyone was so committed to the truth. What do you think it is that made him so comfortable being himself?
Yeah, I mean, but you started the question by asking what was he rebelling against? Well, where was the rebellious spirit from? What formed that? He realized that he lived in a broken society, and he was trying to fix it. And so he was trying to point out what was wrong with the world, as the title of one of his books. And certainly he saw it in the loss of a man's control over his own life. That it was too many forces outside of himself were taking over. Big government, big business.
Yeah. Big government taking over health and schools were a huge concern to him.
Right. So how public education had undermined the authority of the parent, things like that. So those are things he was rebelling at. And, we just talked about drinking. He was also very much rebelling against Puritanism, which he thought really had helped destroy so much of the modern world where people don't know how to enjoy enjoyment. Mm-hmm. And he said the problem with Puritanism is it always causes this overreaction of hedonism, and people don't have a healthy view towards pleasure. They have an unhealthy view towards pleasure. So on the one hand, he's fighting the Puritans. On the other hand, he's fighting the hedonists and the decadents. And he's just trying to get to that sane balance. Beauty is in proportion, in proper proportion. And that's one of his great messages that he's always trying to find as many ways as possible to explain.
Today we put health excuse me, Mike. Today we put health above all. You know, it's like this materialist fear of losing life or something. He smoked cigarettes, cigars, and pipes. Do you think if he still knew today that cigarettes were damaging, would he not still smoke?
Yeah, he said he tried to smoke a pipe, but he couldn't. He never learned how to smoke a pipe.
I've just seen him with a picture of a pipe. So.
Yeah, I don't think you have, but you might have.
He's throwing down a challenge now.
Yeah.
Doug just got stiff armed by.
But he did occasionally smoke cigarettes, but generally he was a cigar smoker. And he said he admitted he smoked like a chimney. And he called tobacco his muse. And I think we have to say that tobacco served him well if it was his muse.
Yeah.
The problem with cigarettes is that the cigarettes were taken over by big business, and they started lacing them with nicotine and making them addictive rather than just using a natural tobacco, which is what the origin of it was. And so it's interesting. I think he'd point out how big business destroyed tobacco in many ways. And also, I mean, one of his great disciples was Marshall McLuhan, the great social critic, and he said cigarettes are for people who don't appreciate tobacco.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Totally.
So I wonder if he resented the addictive quality of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, very much so. I mean, the whole point of any pleasure is that you have to control it; it cannot control you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Question, just jumping off of that thing about his, fighting against Puritanism. Did he ever communicate with H.L. Mencken or have anything to do with him?
They never had any direct communication. They wrote about each other, which is kind of interesting. And I think that there was kind of they both had sort of they were both able to criticize each other but respect each other. And in one point, Mencken says that Chesterton is the cleverest man alive, but then in his private correspondence, he calls Chester one of my pet idiots. So he didn't like the fact that Chester defended Christianity, obviously.
Well, you're talking about one of the least humble men alive in H.L. Mencken, and you're also talking about someone whose private conversations you probably shouldn't read if you want to.
That's true.
What about Woodhouse? What about Woodhouse?
That's. You just wish there was a tighter connection between the two of them. They're both a few passing references in each one's writings to the other, but they didn't know each other. And T.H. White, great historian, when he heard that Chesterton died, his first words were, "Well, P.G. Woodhouse is now the greatest writer in the English language."
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I love it. I agree with that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
He made a lot of predictions that came true. Do you have any off the top of your head, some of your favorites where it was like, because I remember reading one time he was talking about where Germany was headed, and I realized the date was way before World War II. And holy cow, he was completely right. And people probably thought he was crazy.
Yeah, less than a decade, but probably maybe 7 or 8 years before the war, he said that the world was headed towards the worst war in all of human history, and it would start on the Polish border. He predicted the Bolshevik Revolution, and after that, he said communism would die out in Russia under its own weight because it couldn't be sustained. But in the meantime, it would lead to the world's worst bureaucracy. So he predicted communism would lead to a bureaucracy. He was absolutely right on.
Brilliant.
But while everybody was worried about communism, he said that the next great heresy is going to be an attack on morality, especially on sexual morality. And the madness of tomorrow is not in Moscow, but much more in Manhattan.
Wow.
Well, if he's like Nostradamus, then did he get stuff wrong? Well, Nostradamus was just vague, a frog will meet a prince or whatever. But there was no specificity. But what did he get wrong? Is there anything where he couldn't see? His laser vision failed him?
I'm still trying to find where he was wrong.
I love it.
So he should have written what's right about my predictions instead of what's wrong with the world. He got it all right. So he knew I guess he had his finger on the pulse of the weakness of man, and then had his handle on the truth that is absolute so well that he could just kind of see this stuff happening in his time.
That's really well said, Doug. That's really good.
It is, because that is my goal in life, is to leave all my Chesterton books to my kids and go, just read this guy.
and Doug plans on doing that by smoking a lot of tobacco products.
It's true. I choose Copenhagen because I'm not allowed to smoke in the study. But when we get the guys together, it is cigarettes, cigars, and pipes.
You're headed to an early one, Doug. Let's get any final words and wrap it up and let Dale have. I'm assuming breakfast. This is early here in, just to put a date stamp on it, it's early here in Minnesota where I am. And I think you are, right, Dale?
Yes, I'm just not too far from you, Mike. I will have breakfast after this. But I guess one of Chesterton's great lines that in so many ways sums him up. He's so quotable, but one is, he says, it's not always wrong to go down to the lowest promontory and look down on hell. It's when you look up at hell that a serious miscalculation has probably been made.
What do you think? So really, for our audience, we want them to read Chesterton and think about Chesterton and discover this guy. Is there not a resurgence in Chesterton by his loyal readers that are excited about him? Wouldn't you say that? And certainly your work has helped introduce to more people. Do you see a rise in Chesterton?
Well, I guess to put it in perspective, when I started reading Chesterton, there were probably 6 of his books were in print at that time. There's now over 70 of his books in print.
Wow.
And so plus things that were collections of essays that were never put into books during his lifetime are now coming out. So just by that alone, I think we're seeing a resurgence. But yeah, our webpage, chesterton.org, is very popular, very well visited. And folks like yourselves, groups getting together and discussing Chesterton, that is clearly on the rise. We have over 70 local Chesterton societies around the country who get together and meet and smoke, I hope, and talk about Chesterton.
Well, we were never an official one. Yeah,
we're unofficial. We're rogues.
We're rogues. I'm looking for, I don't know why I want the verification by academia and culture when they're still lost. The idea that they would suddenly discover and start teaching Chesterton is probably a wish too far, but I know so many conservative professors and Lewis and Tolkien scholars who quote him so much that it seems like he would be his own subject matter in some class and in some major field of study.
Well, it's just like when Chesterton wrote about Dickens, he was defending Charles Dickens, who had already been dismissed by the intellectuals of his time. But the popular people still loved Dickens. And Chesterton said it's because he talked to the common man, and he would do it by talking over the heads of the intellectuals.
Very good. Very good.
All right, guys, let's wrap it up. We could do 12 hours of this and not get to the end of it. It would be a rambling conversation, which I think Chesterton would actually appreciate. But I just want to thank our guest so much, Mr. Dale Ahlquist. Go to chesterton.org for everything you need for Chesterton. Start with his essay, Who is This Guy and Why Haven't I Heard of Him? And then buy his books. What were the 2 that you, when I asked you to recommend them, could you just repeat those books for people?
Yeah, The Apostle of Common Sense and Common Sense 101.
Yes, start with those and then dive into the huge world of Chesterton, which you now know of because of this man. I did not know. That kind of blew my mind that he wasn't even, it's unfathomable to me that he wasn't in print for you. That must have been... you must have been like Carter discovering the tomb. You was like every time you came across a book. That must have been fantastic.
Sounds amazing.
But thank you again for your time. This is Audio Mullet. Everyone sign off with your own name and we'll just end this.
I'm Doug TenNapel, and I'm a big Chesterton advocate, and I'm a huge Ahlquist fan. So thank you so much for coming on board, Dale. We'd love to have you back on.
I'm Ethan Nicolle. Thanks, Dale. It was awesome.
And Dale, thank you so much. This is Audio Mullet. So long.
Audio Mullet. A mullet of audio smashing you in the face. Audio mullet. Short in front, long in back. It's a fact. It's the audio mullet.
Here we go. The theme just ended. Oh.